Is it just me, or if you see one more of those Liberty Mutual ads with the emu and that stupid guy, are you going to throw yourself in traffic? Or is that just me? Just me? Welcome back to Storytime. In this installment of my MCU Retrospective series, we're examining The Incredible Hulk, the 2008 requel
Please don't call yourself fat.
to Hulk, the 2003 reboot of The Incredible Hulk, the 1978 TV show. We'll be looking closely at how it tells its story, who the characters are and how they are developed, how the plot is constructed, and ultimately what it all means. We'll be going over basically every inch of its green, radioactive surface, so if you're worried about spoilers or can't handle critical discourse, The Incredible Hulk is a 2008 film directed by Louis Leterrier. Prior to this film, he mostly directed over-the-top French action movies written by Luc Besson. The film's credited writer, Zach Penn, had screenplay credits for that Inspector Gadget movie that had trailers on half-of-year-old Disney VHSs, and other comic book movies like Elektra and X-Men 3.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the
Apparently, star Edward Norton also did his own rewrites of the script during shooting, and it has basically the same producers as Iron Man. Conveniently, it also has basically the same characters as Iron Man. We have Main Guy. He is smart, white, a man, and has something the military really wants for a weapon. Lady. She works for or with the main guy and stands by her man, which is him. Elderly antagonist. He is elderly, in a position of authority relative to the main guy, and psychotic for reasons that are never really clear. Military guy. He is a career military guy who is or should be a colonel and is involved in an escalating arms race with the main guy. But I'm sure this is all just a coincidence and not a case of the original creators not caring at all and just plagiarizing themselves. Let's get serious. Bruce is a scientist who specializes in radiation. We eventually learn that he was working with or for the military on radiation resistance of some kind. This leads to him contracting gamma radiation poisoning, a condition that manifests as him turning into an angry green monster if his heart rate becomes too elevated. When he learns General Ross wants to weaponize this for military use, he flees and goes into hiding. This is all backstory. During the actual movie, he is on the lam trying to find a cure for his condition. He is shown to be resourceful and quick thinking, and has a strong desire to not become a tool of the military. He also does this cute thing where he wears his glasses down his nose when he's being sciencey. I don't have real glasses, but he does it like this. Kind of like, interesting. He still has strong feelings for Elizabeth, his former research partner / love partner, whom he hasn't seen or spoken to in 5 years since the accident. It is clear he worries for her safety in his condition. Betty is Bruce's longtime girlfriend, since at least college it seems like. She is a cellular biologist and contributed to Bruce's radiation research in some way. Her one drive is to help Bruce once he's back in town. She's also not on great terms with her father, the General, due to his treatment of Bruce. The General is a general, apparently primarily involved with research and development. He supervised Bruce's work 5 years ago and has since dusted off an old super soldier program that biologically enhances people. He considers Bruce army property and wants to try and replicate his condition in soldiers. He's single-minded to the point of mania about this, and apparently considers it a mark of great shame that Bruce has eluded him for so long. Though we get no indication that anyone else thinks this or even necessarily knows about it. Blonsky is a special ops type guy who is a fighter who likes to fight and just wants a real fight. He receives the experimental serum from the General, which seems to immediately enhance his strength, stamina, and healing ability, though how this is achieved is not mentioned. He immediately becomes a junkie for it and eventually injects some of Bruce's Hulk blood to fulfill his dream of becoming a lizard monster. We also have deeply unethical science man, pizzeria grandpa, and modern family boyfriend. Once again, the only character who is very thoroughly characterized is our protagonist. But here I mean thorough in terms of Iron Man. It plays with interesting Jekyll and Hyde, Beauty and the Beast type tropes, but never really establishes more than a baseline reference. Some of this has to do with conflict development. For example, Bruce is never conflicted about the nature of his condition, and therefore never has anything to question. But I think it mostly has to do with his staticness. Nothing in Bruce's condition substantively changes in the whole movie. He always has it, and it is always the same amount of bad. Therefore, the stakes for him remain the same, and the only real urgency comes from the proximity of Ross. If, for example, each time Bruce has an episode it gets worse or lasts longer or something, there would be more weight for each time he is forced to change. The same is true if the episodes were more unpredictable and not tied to a controllable physical symptom. Since his philosophy about the condition and the circumstances under which it manifests remain constant, he is a static character, which is not ideal in a protagonist because all the conflict in the story must therefore come from outside him. This is also why the last shot of him being pleased with inducing an episode doesn't make any sense. It comes out of nowhere and ignores all we know about the character. The movie also limits Bruce's choice-making ability. The big example is when Betty tracks him down after seeing him in the pizzeria, mainly because the plot needs her to give him the old data. On the one hand, this is the only real choice she gets to make, and it's nice for her. But it takes development away from our protagonist at a point in the story when he really needs it. If he makes the fraught decision to seek her out as the only way to move toward his goal, there's room for development. They can have a nice little scene where they reconnect, sort out their differences, reconcile. Maybe even Modern Family is there, and that gives him a reason to narc on them, which is currently absent from the movie, and it's the only thing that he does. Maybe there's even like an action sequence of sneaking past the general's men to get into her office on campus to retrieve the data. Instead, the data is just a MacGuffin delivered to the protagonist through the Deus Ex Machina delivery system free of charge. And, once again, the characters who aren't Bruce are really only there to be functions of Bruce. For all its similarities, though, this movie does have one thing that Iron Man doesn't, and that is a plot that actually makes sense. Here's a hot take. The Incredible Hulk has a functional, understandable plot. Characters make choices based on clear, established motivations and are working toward specific goals. Bruce wants to cure himself of his monsterism. While in exile, he has got in contact with a Mr. Blue, another scientist who wants to help. Once all self-treatment options have been exhausted, he has to go retrieve his old experiment data and meet Mr. Blue in person. The rest of the movie sees him trying to accomplish this goal while evading General Ross, who is trying to capture Bruce in order to accomplish his goal of replicating the monsterism. Along the way, he recruits Soldier Man, who volunteers for his secret super soldier thing. Of anyone, Blonsky's goals are the most vague. He just wants a good fight, I guess. It's very underdeveloped, but the bones are at least there, so we can understand why he'd want to juice himself with Hulk blood by the end. That sounds so gross.
There's got to be a better way to say that.
Actually, I take that back. Betty is probably the most vague, or at least most general. Her reasons for helping Bruce basically just come down to love. Stand by your man. And possibly a sense of righting the wrong her father has done to Bruce. Either way, none of her choices ultimately really do anything of consequence, so I guess it doesn't matter. Apart from happening to have the old data, she is mostly just an ATM for Bruce. He does all the same things he would have anyway. But we know what is happening and why it is happening. It's not really doing anything special, but it's a seaworthy enough plot. But this isn't to say that there aren't issues, especially with exposition, where there's a big one. The first sequence in the movie is a montage that plays over the opening credits. In it, we are told visually about Bruce's gamma experiment. We also see it go wrong, how violent the Hulk gets, but also that he still recognizes Betty, and that he must flee. I think this is a really dumb choice. Don't get me wrong, we need all this information, and I do appreciate that it is here at all, but we need more. And what we do have, we don't have any context for when we get it. There's no reason why this sequence couldn't play out as an actual scene with dialogue, and I think it would be a lot better for it. Picture this. The movie opens in a hectic science lab. Bruce and Betty are making some last-minute adjustments. She expresses concern for Bruce, who reiterates for her how sound the science is and how much he trusts whatever it is that she did on it. We get to see their relationship in action, how they relate pre-crisis. Then the General shows up, asking why Bruce is experimenting on himself in such an irresponsible way. Here we get a little about the gamma stuff, what it actually does, what the desired outcome will be, stuff we never get in the movie later. Unexplained powers are always a problem in Marvel movies. Then we see the experiment, and how it goes wrong.
My eyes, the goggles do nothing.
A quick flash of Hulk hurting people and escaping, and we're done. This wouldn't have to be much longer than the current credit sequence that we do have. And now that sequence could include snippets of Bruce being a fugitive and the General doing general stuff, or whatever. But it sets the stage a lot better and has the ability to sew in thematic threads early. As it is, it mostly just feels perfunctory. Like the movie is starting off with an assumption that everyone pretty much knows Hulk's origin anyway, so we don't need to go into it, it's fine. This is stupid, and to me demonstrates a real disdain for audience on the part of Marvel. This is not the only time this will come up. Spider-Man, I am coming for you, baby. Basically, instead of doing its own thing, this movie is kind of shrugging its shoulders. You probably saw the other movie from 5 years ago, just remember that. This robs the current movie both of the ability to do anything new or different, and to effectively set up its own story, regardless of how similar or unsimilar it's going to be from any of its predecessors. Ultimately, this is a pretty minor thing in this movie, and the movie later does find pretty nice ways of inserting exposition, so at least by the end we understand everything that is going on. But because some of this comes so piecemeal, it only adds up to a surface-level functional understanding. The movie doesn't have the time or material to achieve anything deeper, which is probably its biggest issue. Let's talk about theme. So far in this series, we've been focusing on the more technical elements of story, characters and conflict and stuff. I've shown that these elements work together to make the plot, the stuff that happens. But there is another critical element to making a really great, or even good, story, and that is theme. If the plot is what a story is about, then theme is what it's about. It's the deeper level, beyond just recounting a series of events. It's the meaning of those events on a personal level. For example, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is about an eccentric industrialist trying to find a worthy heir to his business, but it's about developing your own identity and refuting celebrity culture and late capitalist excess. I am of the belief that it's really hard to have meaningful themes without a coherent plot. Almost always it is by experiencing plot that we come to thematic conclusions about a story. It's not impossible, just hard. Conversely, having an interesting plot in no way guarantees that your story is about anything. The Incredible Hulk is a movie that, while having a clear enough plot, has no identifiable theme, so it isn't about anything. Think about it. What is this movie ultimately about? What is it saying? This is hard to parse because the Hulk doesn't really represent anything in Bruce or to Bruce, and therefore to us. The movie mentions anger as a trigger, and also fear, we'll get to that. Maybe it's about learning to develop self-control. But Hulk comes out whenever Bruce's heartbeat reaches a certain threshold, for any reason. He is not shown to actually have any major issues with anger or fear, and so has nothing to really overcome. One gets the impression that if he were allowed a regular life, he probably wouldn't have any episodes anymore. So it's not about that. Maybe it's examining masculinity then. The General and Blonsky are both examples of certain types of masculinity lost in the modern world and running amok, and Bruce is framed as an antithesis to them. He's an intellectual striving for harmony. But the way the antagonists are defeated is not through Bruce's talents as a researcher or through their own shortcomings. It's just by Bruce winning a fistfight as his violent alter ego. So it's not about that. Maybe it's about living with a chronic mental or physical illness. One thing the Hulk can easily symbolize is literal physical conditions that can't be controlled and that others might misunderstand or try to exploit. I mean, maybe a giant green monster isn't the most delicate metaphor for disability, but it's something? For any of this to land, though, We would need to see Bruce putting forth any amount of effort toward accepting and learning to thrive with his Hulkness, not just getting by, which we don't. And no, the last shot doesn't count since it comes out of nowhere, so it's not about that. Or anything else I can think of. Of course, we might also ask, do stories need deep original themes? No, not necessarily. Many films, especially comedy and action films, don't really have much in the theme department, but are really entertaining nonetheless. Why is this? I think it's because they have other things to offer that help make up for that deficit. If you're going to go lean on story elements, you have to compensate for it elsewhere, say with an action set piece or jokes or something. This is where The Incredible Hulk runs into problems. It has defined characters and a functional plot, but it's pretty boilerplate and has nothing really original to contribute. It also looks pretty bad. Therefore, for the overall story to be impactful, it needs something, like compelling thematic material, to make up for its deficiencies. But it doesn't, so the film as a whole is pretty mediocre. I know here on Storytime we mainly focus on the writing and story elements of movies, and some companies' not great visual effects work is not really that. You may notice, I'm clearly not a filmmaker and really don't know the first thing about effects work other than that it's hard and takes forever. But I think it bears mentioning here, because I think one of the big reasons mainstream fans rate this movie so much lower than the rest of the MCU is because the Hulk effects have never really been good, and this causes them to not take the story seriously. All stories rely on an audience's willing suspension of disbelief, intentionally acknowledging that they understand that they are going to escape into a fantasy world on purpose and accept whatever they find there. We all know people who don't do this, who find like all movies unbelievable or not realistic, and we hate them. We know it's fake. That's the whole point. That said, a story can disrupt our suspension of disbelief if it stops feeling plausible in the context of the story, on its own terms. In other words, it can be too fake. Maybe this is story elements like character choices or world building, but it can also come down to presentation. In the case of The Incredible Hulk, I think the animation of Hulk and later the Lizard Man take people out of the story. It is distracting because it so obviously sticks out from the world being created. This kind of thing is not very common in the MCU. VFX is usually something they do pretty good at. And I think because of this, fans are less forgiving. When they think of this movie, they think of how hard it was to get lost in the world and take the story seriously because the VFX kept poking them in the eye. Their memory is therefore of a poorly told story. If these effects elements worked better, I think this film would have the same kind of reputation as other Marvel movies from the early period. Anyway, here, in no particular order, are other thoughts I have about The Incredible Hulk. 1. Hulk travels some 4,500 miles as the Hulk smashes overnight from Rio de Janeiro to Guatemala. To do this, he would need to make an average speed of around 375 miles per hour, assuming a constant rate of travel over 12 hours. Bruce the Human then travels another 3,000 miles from Chiapas to Virginia in 17 days. Assuming a constant rate of travel this time and allowing 12 hours of rest every day, this works out to about 175 miles a day at 14 miles per hour, twice the normal human jogging speed. Of course, no explicit indication of Bruce's mode of travel is made, but walking is shown. This is a small, but not insignificant, suspension of disbelief thing. Seriously, all we need is a picture of Bruce on a boat and we're fine. 2. The Portuguese translations are bad in ways they don't need to be. For example, in an early scene, Bruce's jiu-jitsu instructor mentions medo, fear, but subtitles changed this to anger. He also states that entendimento, an understanding of the body, is the best way to counteract a fear response. This is instead translated as control of the body. I actually think that maybe this all hints at story changes during production. Fear as a trigger makes way more sense than anger for Bruce. He is portrayed as being calm and unvolatile, not prone to anger, but I'd certainly buy that he is fearful, or capable of being fearful, both of being found out and of having an episode. It's the hint of a plausible theme. or it's just someone being a lazy translator. 3. I'm also reasonably sure there is no such thing as Mountain Dew colored Guaraná. I understand this is for stylistic symbolism and stuff, but it's very weird. 4. Hulk can put out helicopter fuel-based explosions with the awesome power of clapping, a thing the movie takes seriously and does not explain. I mean, I guess it maybe makes like a vacuum, since putting more air onto it would just make it bigger, so he claps the air away. Also, this is something he just knows how to do, along with making precise attack cracks in the ground by hitting it. It was probably in the comics, and so just has to show up here. But when all he does up to this point is use his hands and heavy things to pound with, it feels like a cheat. Unexplained powers. 5. Why does Hulk refer to himself as Hulk? No one gives him this name or says it around him. Lizard Man also somehow knows it and uses it instead of just Banner.
Take a look at Banner, Michael!
Which is weird. It's the same thing as with Iron Man. Obviously, in a children's comic, the character will have a name like this, and it requires no real justification, and it's fine. But in a movie with a mostly serious tone made for not children, it sticks out. Suspension of disbelief. Here, all we need is for Bruce to refer to his condition like that. Like, maybe he's even just trying to distance himself from it or something. The fact that it is just here for reasons of fan service is annoying, and it pulls us out of the story. 6. I do like the occasional bonkers Frenchness that peeks through now and then. I'm assuming it comes from the director, because at times this movie totally reminds me of Alien Resurrection, who also has a French director, and I kind of like that. However, it does have some of the same types of issues that movie has. Basically, I think it's really hard to integrate American action movie seriousness and French action movie silliness into one thing. 7. This is our second, and I think probably last time, seeing people becoming passionate, which is nice for the reasons I gave in Iron Man. Of course, this one is clearly the better example since it's tied more to plot and feels a lot less problematic. So, probably should have just held that point for here and not made it then. And 8. Tony Stark showing up to talk to General Ross makes exactly no sense. His purpose, apparently, is to inform Ross of the Avenger Initiative, which apparently he represents. Remember this for next movie when it's not true. But Ross has no contact with Bruce. That's the whole reason he's a drunken wreck. Tony clearly doesn't want the super soldier stuff, and he knows Bruce has escaped, so what does he want from Ross? And why would he, a private citizen and not a military superior to the general, need to recruit him or inform him of S.H.I.E.L.D. activities? The answer is this is fan service, and it gets in the way of the larger story. All we needed was Bruce getting a mysterious letter along with a necklace at the end, and we would understand it's a connected universe. Tony could even just show up at Bruce's cabin. I'd believe that S.H.I.E.L.D. could locate him. He doesn't even have to talk. He could just get off of a helicopter and we'd be like, oh no! And I think that's it. Ultimately, the Incredible Hulk's problems aren't quite as egregious as Iron Man's, but they are serious enough to really keep it from being much good. It has characters with well-defined motivations, even if they're pretty stock and static, and a resulting plot that is clear and coherent, if uninspiring. But because everything is so boilerplate and the visualization of Hulk is so poor, a lack of theme really kills any hope the picture has of getting off the ground. What we're left with is a pretty unmemorable mess. Weirdly, kind of the general consensus among fans as well, making this probably the only time I'll ever agree with them.
I know, kids. I'm scared too.
Anyway, I hope this was mildly enjoyable for the 7 of you. Join me next time for a discussion of Iron Man 2, a movie that maybe has a plot. We'll see. Good night.